Hi there, I'm Delma and I coordinate a course for undergraduate health professionals, and this course runs in Term 2 and Term 3. And as you're well aware, we're no longer doing multiple choice questions or MCQs in our exams, and so I thought it was pretty unfair for students who might have to repeat in Term 3 after not getting through in Term 2 to then have to face a whole new examination structure. Also, because Term 1 is my non-teaching term, it was easier to do the conversion during my non-teaching period than to try to do it between the very cramped period between Term 2 and Term 3. So, no more MCQs. Now what? Well, I'm going to tell you what I've done, and hopefully when I talk to you about VSAQs, very short answer questions, and that's Rob Reed's abbreviation, not mine, I'm going to help you maybe be a little bit happier about the situation. Basically, my process involved converting the questions, choosing the questions which were most appropriate, reconsidering the exam structure, and then finally formatting the paper to make it easier to mark at the end and to collate the results. And when I've finished telling you what I did, I'll tell you what I found during the exam this term. The first step was to convert the questions. Now, I have a very large multiple choice question bank on my Moodle site, and I got some technical support to download those and then convert them into a Word document. And if you want details on that, you should maybe call me. So if we take one of these downloaded questions, this one's one I just chose very quickly. A decrease in vessel diameter is called, and the correct answer is vasoconstriction. Now, if you look at the other answers that are there, you might think, well, you know, a student really needs to know when they're doing multiple choice quite a bit of information. When we get to doing the VSAQs, it's a little bit different. We need to be able to direct the student to the correct answer fairly tightly. So your first impulse, or my first impulse, is to simply write the question without the answer on the end. A decrease in vessel diameter is called. Now, if you think about that for a while, there's a number of things that students could say to that. They could say that decreasing the diameter will cause the vessel to get smaller. It's correct. It could be called tightening or constricting. It could be the correct answer, or they could take it a step further and say that this decrease in vessel diameter will actually produce increased peripheral resistance, which shows a lot of knowledge but isn't necessarily the answer you were looking for. So, reconsidering that then, we changed it to vasoconstriction will cause blank vessel diameter. And of course you'd be looking for the word decreased. However, the answer there is not quite complete. There are other vessels that the student might think of. They might be a mad keen fisherman and think about fishing vessels. I don't know. But sometimes you've got to put yourself into the shoes of a student and think, what else could the student think when they see this question? So refining it a little bit, we clarify that it is blood vessel diameter, and this is the question we eventually went with. That's the royal we. It was me, my decision. Okay. Then we need to choose the questions, and there are two things to think about when you're choosing the questions. First of all, of course, you have to meet the learning outcomes. Now, they might be the course learning outcomes, but I would consider they would be the learning outcomes for that week's lectures for those topics. The other thing to do is to think what knowledge is essential at this level. So my students are in first year, they're learning the very basics. We give them some of the advanced information. We often give them information to put it into context, but what do we require them to be able to reproduce under an exam situation? So if we had a multiple choice question that said aldosterone will promote an increase in blood pressure, result in a larger output of urine, promote a decrease in blood volume, or increase sodium reabsorption. Now, aldosterone does do a lot of things, but it only does one up there. It promotes an increase in blood pressure. It actually increases the reabsorption of sodium rather than decreases it, and it promotes thirst and encourages decreased urine output, all of those things. So if I want to use this question as a very short answer question, I need to decide what is that essential knowledge. So the essential knowledge I consider is which hormone increases the reabsorption of sodium, and then I can give them some more information if I want to or need to. pointing out that this would also lead to an increase in blood pressure. With the exam structure, I've always had a Part B in my exam structure, which is more for free-form answers where the students write down what they know and they try to put it into language that describes their knowledge. It actually reflects a higher level of learning. It reflects comprehension and sometimes application depending on the question. So I have this Part B and I really wanted to reconsider what was going on here. And at the same time, I considered the timing and the weighting that comes out from the from moving from multiple choice questions to short answer questions. So here's an example of a Part B question. It's asking the student to write some information. Now, I used to have the Part B questions at 20 marks each, and it was the part of the exam that the students did find most difficult. I also considered that the very short answer questions are now going to take longer to do, and so I thought, well, I need to give them more time there. Maybe I need to cut down the amount of time that they spend doing the Part B. So I increased the weighting of the Part A with the very short answer questions from 33% to 60%. I went from 40 questions, 40 marks, to 60 questions, 60 marks. I also decreased the weighting of Part B to 40%, down from 80 marks to 40 marks. And I also increased the time allowed because I believe very short answer questions, the student still needs to spend a bit more time thinking about it, whereas with multiple choice questions, very often the recognition and the recall prompt makes the answering a bit faster. Although I don't know whether or not that's true with the decreasing levels of literacy we're seeing. The next process was to think about formatting the paper, and this is largely to do with how to mark the exam. When you have short answer questions and you simply fill in the blanks and the student writes them in those blanks, it's very difficult sometimes to find them. You're putting ticks all over the paper. When you count the ticks on your page, it doesn't necessarily, you might miss one by accident. I've also seen exam papers set by other people where it's just continuous from front to back, right as it goes, and one page might have 9 marks, another page might have 16 marks, the next page could have 15 marks, and it gets very difficult to add them up. So all of this formatting is important. What I did was go with a table. So I inserted one table per page. Each table has 5 questions. Each table is another topic. So there were 12 topics in the course, so we have 60 marks altogether. The other thing to think about with your formatting is that your length of your line needs to be always the same. I thought about, do I have 2 lines if I want 2 words? I put 1 line in, and I told my students quite clearly that the 1 line could be a single or 1 or 2 word answers. I made all of the lines exactly the same length. I made sure that if there was an A in front of it or an an in front of it, both choices are offered so as to not give a hint about the first letter. And I was careful to always include plural and singular if it could be either. Now this table I felt gave me a very easy way to mark the exam. The marker simply ticked or crossed, and then at the bottom they wrote the result for each page. That's a 3. It's just not a very good one. It's easy to see. The answer box is short so that the student is restricted to that small 1 word. They know they're not writing an essay. Another way you might consider doing it is to maybe produce 1 answer sheet on the paper that the students can write all of their answers in. I thought about this, but I thought that moving backwards and forwards would be difficult. I thought about maybe the student could pull the exam paper apart and then staple it back together, but I was a bit concerned that something might go wrong there. But that's a possibility as well. Now, I did have a few students who, despite the instructions and the blank spaces and everything, wrote 1 to 60 in their exam booklets and wrote the answers there. It worked quite well because they didn't miss any questions, so they didn't go 1, 4, 5, 9, which would have made it very difficult for me. They wrote clearly 1 word on each line. They didn't try to use up the paper sometimes they try to minimise the use of the paper. So if you can rely on students to set it out properly, that is also an option. Or maybe if there aren't so many, that might be reasonable. So what did I find at the end of all this exercise? In 2013, this was my grade distribution. This course typically has around 20 to 25% fail once we do all the DEs, but these results are only for those students that completed the exam. So you can see that there are quite a number of distinctions, high distinctions and credits and passes. In 2014, the exam that's just passed, I had the same, almost identical fail rates. Of the students who sat the exam, 13% failed 23% did not get through. They didn't get a pass, credit, distinction or high distinction. And it was very similar. A few less SEs and a few more Fs, but not anything that I would be concerned about in terms of statistical significance. But the interesting thing is that I did get more of a bell curve. We see less HDs and more passes. And I think this is probably reflecting the fact that we've moved away from multiple choice questions. But I also think that the students' results, as in the pass rate, reflects the fact that this group was aware of what was happening and they needed to put the extra effort into study. Can't prove that, but anyway, there were no disasters, and so I was quite happy with the process in the end. So thanks for taking the time to watch this, and if you want to chat, email me, call me. Happy to tell you what else I've done. Thank you.